my name is, as I said, Dr. Zeeshan. I've been working with within University of Sindh for quite some time now. And now, basically, I've been involved in multiple different projects from animation, graphics, augmented reality to virtual reality, game development, and game designing, and so on and so forth. Currently, our ongoing research projects are focused on something regarding serious game designs for special needs children. So we'll briefly talk about this research area and what basically this research covers and what exactly we are trying to do. Trying not to go into too much detail so it doesn't become too much boring. But hopefully we'll try to keep things very simple and straightforward. Now, if we talk about in term learning, there are basically 7 different paradigms of learning, from verbal, visual, musical, auditory, physical, logical, social, and solitary. Each of these different dimensions provide a different unique mechanism for an individual to learn. Verbal obviously means what we see, we basically learn. Visual means what we, verbal means what we talk about, what we listen, we basically learn from there. Visual basically means whatever we see, we learn from our surroundings and environment. That also represents our musical or auditory information. These all 3 become one of the primary sources of learning. What we hear, what we see, and what we experience in terms of our real environment. Secondly, we go with physical, logical, and social. These are something that we develop, or these learning skills we develop within our schools and through our education system. Now, combining them, basically a child is able to grasp the knowledge from various different sources. However, and each of these sources is unique to each individual. Not everybody is quite comfortable in understanding or every single mode, or is able to cooperate and get the knowledge from every single source. For example, nowadays online learning has become one of the key source of learning. However, you would still, if you do a survey, there's a huge number of population that is still very uncomfortable with learning online, and they still prefer physical mode of learning, physical mode of teaching, where they see the teacher face to face and they interact with the teacher. So that's one mode of learning. So there are people who would find more comfortable watching videos and learning from them, and then there are people who would find them that the physical mode of learning is more preferable and more physical. So that's one mode of learning. Musical, verbal, physical, these are different sources of learning that people interact. Even the social learning or the solitary learning, they become key components whenever we talk about learning. However, and this is normal for everybody, we might not understand it. If a kid grows up at home, he is learning through all these means. He's learning from his parents, what their parents are teaching. If the parents are teaching speaking English at home, the kids automatically starts to speak English. If the parents are speaking Urdu as a mother tongue, the kid automatically starts to learn Urdu. If the kid parents are speaking Sindhi, for example, then again the kid becomes Sindhi language. So that's because he's listening to his environment, he's interacting socially, he's interacting visually and auditory. All these modes are coming into it. Then the same thing goes for the schooling and every other purpose. However, our study focuses on something called dyslexia. You might have heard about this previously. Dyslexia and autism are one of the key neurological disorders that are considered when a child grows up. However, dyslexia is not so crucial or not so what we call threatening or worrisome. However, it possesses a key challenge with specific to learning abilities. That's where our learning education and learning systems come into play. Whenever we talk about dyslexia, this is a specific neurological order that hinders the learning abilities of a children. This is an ability that stops a children from identifying or understanding certain educational, terminological, psychological concepts throughout their basic life. It's not because they are not intelligent. It's not because they don't want to learn. It's not because they are not able to learn. It's just that their mental, the way their mind works, or the way our own mind, the neurological capacity works, they are not able to understand certain principles, certain technological or certain words, in other words, that we present to them. So this is what's happening in a very common sense nowadays. Many people are suffering from it, and very little amount of work is being done on it. And we, through some other organizations, are basically trying to figure out a means of promoting this thing to our societies as well. So, for example, you might have a kid at home who is very good at English. However, when you ask him to write Urdu, they are very poor at Urdu. Or Sindhi or Arabic. They will be very fluent in English. They understand English concepts very good. But when you ask them to write Urdu, or write Sindhi or write Arabic text, they become very problematic. You might have a child who's very good at Urdu understanding, but if you ask them to write English, you will might find that they are not able to write English words properly. Their ability to understand A and B, B and D is mixed. Their ability to understand E and C is mixed. Similarly, their ability to understand Y and P is mixed. They are not able to understand the characters shape properly or their form properly. So similarly, that also progresses to the mathematics symbol as well. There are children that are suffering from something called metacalcia, which basically refers to not being able to understand mathematical symbols properly. So they might be very good at English or Urdu or reading Arabic Quran or everything. But when it comes to mathematics, you might find that they are very weak and they're not able to understand the words properly. They're not able to do calculations and mathematical symbols. So this entirely is considered as something called dyslexia, having a difficulty in understanding written words or reading or the pronunciation of the words or the concepts of the words that doesn't fit in their mind. That if I say apple, the picture of apple exactly doesn't fit in their brain. So this is like a neurological disorder, and it has multiple dimensions when it works with it. It can be considered as an oral language difficulty. It might be considered as a reading difficulty or a writing difficulty. You might identify if you talk in terms of oral, people might have a difficulty in terms of identifying letters. Or if you talk about in terms of hearing, you might find that people have difficulty in understanding the phonetic pronunciation of words, or they might be in understanding or speaking themselves. This is where sometimes stammering comes into play. Children who usually stammer sometimes do face these kinds of problems. Similarly, misreading or omitting different words. Lots of time you would see people, they are very fluent in Urdu or Sindhi, but when you ask them to read English, you would note that they would skip letters. They might not be reading the words in a sequence. Certain nouns or pronouns or adjectives, they suddenly skip it, and that's because their mind is not able to understand and read those words and not picture them clearly. This is one form of dyslexia. Reading disability, similarly putting it into writing form as well. You would find many children having very poor writing skills, not because they have a bad, the lack of writing, but it's just their brain is not able to connect the shape of the letters correctly with the sound that goes inside the mind, and they're not able to create that mental picture to put it on the paper. So this is a whole in terms of what we refer to in terms of dyslexia. And this is quite common. As per our research, many famous people around the world have this issue. Many famous people around the world have acknowledged that they had issue of dyslexia at certain point and certain time. Okay. So going forward, what our idea is to, we want to use technology, and we want to use, for example, the mobiles. Nowadays, it has become quite a common source of learning for children as well, and a quite interactive form of learning as well. So using mobile, we want to explore this, that how we can come up with a solution that would facilitate these children in understanding and using the mobile phones. So many applications have been developed that cater to the specific needs of such kind of learning. So for example, people who have a difficulty in understanding letters, so specific applications are there who present a very bold and unique character so that the student can see those characters very clearly, and then they allow it to move the fingers on it, read those characters, spell and identify those characters amongst bunch of characters, or identify the shape based on the sound and pronunciation. So these are certain applications and people who are basically working on this dyslexic issue, trying to resolve this dyslexic problem. Similarly, other applications like Dyslexia Baka, they are also developing specific letter-based applications to help children understand and identify various different characters in a unique and different manners. So certain work is being progressed, and obviously there are shortcomings to this application development already, from alphabets to mathematics. People who try to, who are having difficulty, people are trying to work certain solutions for them. So some literature work exists that is there, but obviously there are some certain shortcomings. Certain applications have some issues that we are working with. Now, what our goal is, we are trying to work on this. Now, all these applications basically are considered as something called serious games. They come under the gamification category, where they involve the interactivity of, where they use the children, they involve the children, and they provide an interactivity to the children so they can interact with the application, and inconsequently they learn something. And when we do that, that comes under the umbrella of serious games. And the application of serious games are quite wide. They are not only specific to playing games for the fun, but what basically defines serious games is that ability to understand the concepts of mind, how the pedagogy works, and then use that pedagogy and taxonomical principles into developing an application that can actually be used for learning purpose, like these applications that are used for learning purpose. So they are under the umbrella of serious games, and within that game, we have serious games. But obviously, we know that if you follow up one of some of these principles of AI, HCI, graphics, you can create games that are work in multiple different dimensions, in multiple different applications. But if you cater specific to serious games, then its umbrella is very specifically focusing on educational contents and e-learning. With these concepts, we have a specific purpose. Without a purpose, we would not be able to fulfill that e-learning and educational content. And when we give that a particular purpose, we follow a gamification principles and we use a game technique. And by game technique, we mean being able to interact with the game. So if a normal person is playing a game like PUBG or Counter Strike kind of a game, basically the idea is that a player interacts with the environment, interacts with other people. The same concept comes here. So you take an educational concept, you take a learning concept, you give it a particular purpose that it should follow a particular purpose. And then you create a gamification principle using certain techniques that would allow the child to interact with that particular game and then have a particular story and fun environment so that they can follow a chain of learning through an interactive and intuitive manner. So that's what a complete serious game umbrella basically allows us to do. When we develop a serious game, this is the certain postulates that we need to consider. This is where our main research areas is basically focusing on that. Okay, if this is what I want to do, I want to develop a serious game that has an educational content, that has a specific purpose, that uses game techniques for interactivity, and it is supposed to be fun and entertainment. But how should I develop it? So there are specific postulates that we need to follow. It completely differs and is differentiated from other game techniques that we develop. For example, if you develop a normal game, your major area is that graphics should be good, interactivity should be good, more feature and more compelling it should be so that user can be playing game for longer hours. To develop an application, it has a more specific that it serves a specific purpose. But when you talk about serious games, we need to have a specific postulates that we basically are currently working on. And those postulate means that it should reduce the cognitive fatigue, it should avoid cluttering, it should offload additional tasks and be specific to only certain portion of tasks that you want to work with. Don't use additional jargons, use consistent UI design, avoid instant alert messages, graphics and images, removal backgrounds, text. So these text and animations, these are basic 10 postulates that we have designed and we have proposed in our research work, that when we talk about serious games, you should be focused on that. So if I talk about cognitive fatigue, the number one, for example, so basically it means that the amount of brain use, when we talk about cognitive fatigue, means that the game should be so simple, easy and fun to use. It should not be complex that the child who is already suffering from some disability or some restrictions within his mind gets more fatigue in his hand that, oh, it's too difficult to play. So for example, if you give a 5-year-old a game that is too complex to play, they would stop playing it. Their interest would immediately lose and they will switch to watching YouTube cartoons. So we want to make sure that the game is easy, interactive. It doesn't have a complex UI, like too many options and buttons and click here and click there and click that and click that. That will create more problematic issues within our game. So that's one major postulate that we're working on. To reduce, we eliminate complex features. Be more expressive and purposeful. So the UI buttons and the concept should be more expressive. Avoid too much information on a single page. So the more information you put on a UI, the more issues it creates. Avoid cluttering, for example. By significant, when we create an app, we have too many options and buttons and click on left menu, click on that widget, click on floating button, click on settings, left, right, up, down. All these buttons should be removed. It should have a full screen view. It should be a very simple, clean, attractive UI so that the child sees more attractiveness and less options to interact with. So for example, if you look at these menus, these are very complex, having lots of options and buttons. So we need to make it more easy to use. And if there are additional options required, they should be hidden away in a manner that it does not interfere with the child's ability to interact with the game or to interact with the applications. Okay, so avoid pop-up menus or navigation drawers, because if you, even if you accidentally click it, it creates more menus and the child can have more problem with that. So we try to make it more simple and more easy to use. Then avoid acronyms or technical terms or postulates. So instead of using, for example, word, letters and sound, now this becomes a difficult for a child to understand. If you use letters and sound, that would create more problems. Instead of that, we use a very simple UI design where there can be a speaker for a sound, an A for letters, and B or C. That would basically be more interactive and interesting for the child rather than using complete words. Then, for example, instead of using, for example, you have moved to level 1 or level 2 or level 3, instead of using these big buttons or big icons or big names, we use more interactive graphics to understand that, to let the child know that they are at level 1 or level 2 and level 3, and then so on and so forth. So that's what basically we mean when we say to use a very simple UI in Argons. Similarly, avoid using technical terminologies. Okay, that would again create more confusion with it. We try to make it more simple, use more interactive colors, give more in descriptive and icon-based representations. Similarly, visual consistency is another something that we need to have in our UI design when we talk about our serious games. Visual consistency meaning that your layouts, your colors, your themes, your fonts should be consistent throughout your game. This is something that is lacking in lots of games that we have explored on Google Play Store and App Store, that they do not follow a single consistent theme. There's lots of change of colors, there's lots of change of icons, lots of change of buttons and menus, and something is not very clear for the child to understand what they want to do. At certain point, they focus more on graphics than the actual content, which actually creates a negative aspect in terms of learning as well. Okay, so you need to be consistent between the layouts to reduce the fatigue. It has to follow a consistent theme. The fonts, the styles need to be in a more prominent and consistent manner. So for example, if we have a consistent layout example here, so if I use this figure where we have game 1, game 2, game 3, this is one block, a grid layout. The second screen would also follow the similar grid layout. That would basically mean that the child mind is already set on the first screen and he knows that I have a grid box available. Then at the second screen would also again follow the same grid layout aspect. However, if you use an inconsistent layout where the first screen is based on a larger grid layout and then the next screen goes inside a linear layout. Now this linear layout is completely different from the grid layout. This creates an inconsistency and would reduce the ability of the child to understand how the game is working, because you are changing the menus, you are changing the icons, or you're changing the colors too consistently. So that's one example what we refer to. Then for example, typeface, the fonts, the size of the fonts, the size of the text also is quite essential and quite important, which basically refers that you use a consistent icon size, you use a consistent font size, you use a consistent font styles. So for example, if I come here, the icon is large here, the next screen, the icon is small. So this creates a problem. So in this screen, there's a larger size buttons, but here we have a cluttered and too many buttons available. So that again reduces the ability of child to understanding, because again, remember where our focus is that the child already is having a problem and we want to ensure that they learn easily, they have the ability to understand the concepts very easily, and they can interact with the application, with the graphics consistently and easily. So these are what we refer to in terms of visual concepts. Then if I come inside to functionality, interaction between the different elements, because whenever we talk about an application that is specific for children, it has to have all elements interacting with the child. If there is only one button for back at the bottom of the screen and all other elements within the app are not interacting properly, the child will very easily get bored, because we have to ensure that they remain on the app, they use the app, and they interact with every single concept. So if they click on the center screen, it should have a visual feedback, it should have an auditory feedback as well. Similarly, the reactions to specific attributes in terms of buttons should be there. So if I click on a button, it should have certain form of animation to know the child, to let the child know that they have clicked on correct option, but it's not doing anything, or it has a certain purpose that is currently not fulfilling. Okay, so these are some of the postulates. Then if I go inside it, alert messages, instant alert and dialogues diverts the child's attention, avoiding annoying notifications, applications, functionality would actually help if you reduce these kind of things when you design an app for a specific game type. Use recorded messages and instructions in cognitive applications would actually be more feasible. So and then in terms of graphics, we try to use more expressive, more colorful graphics. So if I have an A character, for example, but if it is only written as A, and at the same time I have a written A with a smiley face on it, this becomes more interactive. This becomes more interestingly and appealingly attractive to the child, rather than a character that is just simple plain A. Okay, so that again becomes our major postulate, that when we design a serious game for children, we have to be more specific and understandable that the child is looking for an interactive, fun way. Their mind is and trying to look out for, in other words, more colorful, more cartoony, and more happy faces. In other words, right? So if you use a more even these smiley faces within the character, this would be more pleasant to the child, and they would be more happy to use such kind of things rather than an app that displays only ABCD in a plain form. So that's one major postulate that we are trying to work and trying to propose. Dyslexic children can easily get distracted by too many visual feedbacks within our UI. So for example, these are from the literature review that we discussed, and I said there were shortcomings. There were too many different UI components here. There's a background here. There is too many balloons and characters and letters. The child would not know what I am supposed to do exactly, even though they are supposed to click on a P button. But however, there are so many buttons here, and the distraction, their mind is not currently able to focus. And that's the problem of dyslexia, that amongst multiple characters, their mind is not focusing on one particular thing, and it confuses lots of characters. So for example, even if we take the second picture, same concept here. These are small letters. There are, as compared to what a dyslexic mind would read, there are too many mixed letters here. So if I take this symbol, this would not be a very feasible UI design for a dyslexic or any children that is having a certain disorder. So we need to be more open, more specific to that particular concept. So we choose words and characters in a manner that would give us a more appeal to the character and make that character isolated. In other words, the legible is one of the main features in UI. Your text should be legible. Normally Android recommends your should be a 48 plus SP font size, DP size of a component. However, for a dyslexia children, we go for somewhere around 68 to 78 DPI of a text size minimum. That would allow us to have a large font size. And sometimes font would also matter a lot, that whether you use a serif or a sans serif font type, it should be a clear and large with a nice contrasting background. All these are too darker colors for a child to understand exactly what's going on. But if you use a character with such kind of background, it would again create more confusion. So we need to make sure that the color choice and the color combination is in a better way. But if you use a darker background, then you use a lighter foreground, so that the character and the contrast of the information that is displayed on the screen becomes more legible. If you use a darker background with a darker foreground of a character, again, it's not legible even for a normal person, let alone the dyslexic children. Similarly, if you use too lighter colors, again, they become very blurry and non-readable. So with a yellow and white background, again, yellow and white don't mix together. So we need to ensure that if I'm using a yellow foreground text color, the background either needs to be more darker than that, so that the yellow color can stand out, or I can change the foreground color to a darker color because I have a lighter background, so that it stands out more clearly and more prominent. Okay, so these are some of the postulates that we have been working in terms of designing a serious games for specific children, and we are trying to come out with certain set of postulates that would basically allow the developers to develop more correct and accurate games for the such type of children. Okay, so that's just this short intro of my talk. Thank you very much. I hope you followed along and understood the basic idea of what we are trying to say. I welcome any questions if there are any.
Thank you, sir. If anybody has questions, please proceed. Okay. Let's welcome the third presenter of the session, Miss Shazia Samu. She will present her article, which is titled as User Acceptance of Internet of Things in Higher Education Institutes in Pakistan. Please welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Can